We had, I think, 6 islands in all. One was a large island, which we cut into 3 islands. We dug canals. That was a huge project. It really was huge.
It was around this time that Betsy met her husband, Brian Garnham, who came to work as an engineer at the compound and whom she married in 1986.
I loved my life in Liberia. I liked the animals, I liked the work, I liked the people I worked with, and I thought it would be okay. I don't know. But it's a difficult place.
In 1989, Liberia descended into the absolute chaos of the first of 2 violent civil wars. Rebel groups led by the now infamous warlord Charles Taylor formed a particularly brutal uprising that included child soldiers, cross-dressing cannibals, and wholesale slaughter of innocent civilians. Amidst this madness, Betsy continued both her research and the care of the chimps they had retired to the island.
If they came to shoot a chimp, I'd stand in front of the cage like that.
So Charles Taylor and the rebels were coming. What made you decide to stay?
Well, we had about 100 chimpanzees, and they were in cages, and there were animals on islands. They all had to be fed. And we had a lot of employees, maybe 50, 60. And we thought that if we stayed there, we could keep the place together and that the employees would remain unharmed. Expatriates were running away, Liberians were running away. And when we would go to the islands to feed the chimps, we would see bodies floating in the water. Sometimes women with babies tied to their back. And the people were dying and they were starving to death, and little children. Sometimes I didn't want to go outside because I knew there would be dead children outside because they had starved to death that night.
As the war escalated, Betsy found herself more and more compelled to help the victims of the slaughter.
There was a hotel about 3 miles from our house, and it was filled with 600 women and children, all from this village. And they had killed all the men and all the boys over 12. And eventually I got permission from Charles Taylor, because I heard that their lives, these women, that there was going to be a massacre at the hotel. I went up and I saw Charles Taylor, and I got permission to move them to a larger Ghanaian community that was protected by the Catholic Church in Buchanan.
I mean, here you are running like a chimpanzee research facility, but in the middle of a civil war, and you're saving hundreds of Liberian women and children. That doesn't sound crazy to you?
No, I think we spent a lot of time doing those kind of things more than, I mean, we went to work every day, but we got very involved in the community. Anybody would get very involved in the community.
Betsy and the lab were able to remain unharmed until 1993, when the violence of the Civil War made its way to her doorstep.
The people opposed to Taylor were coming up the airport road. Taylor's people called on the radio, I guess, and said they were leaving. My husband and I knew we were all alone there.
As the anti-Taylor forces swept through the area, they stormed into her home and came after her husband, Brian.
They just came in. And I think they thought that he had worked for Charles Taylor because we were the only expatriates that stayed behind. And they shot him. And he just died right away. I mean, he just fell to the ground dead. And I tried to make them shoot me, and they wouldn't do it.
Why did you stay in Liberia after your husband was killed in front of you?
I mean, how do you just walk out with all those other people? You run away and leave the people and the chimps, and it just, I don't know.
Betsy continued to work at the lab and made it through both the First and Second Civil War in Liberia. But in the end, it wasn't the violence that closed the lab, but more the change of public opinion regarding animal testing with primates back home in America. It was anti-testing videos like this one of other, much harsher facilities that turned the tide against the practice. By the late 90s, when chimpanzees were proven to be a poor model for HIV and AIDS research, The NIH placed a moratorium on breeding research chimps, making the case that most chimp testing was more cruel than effective. Although opinions differ on the ethics of animal testing, the research that Betsy oversaw led to life-saving vaccines for hepatitis B, as well as a screening method for hepatitis C, two diseases that combined affect millions of people worldwide. Regardless of these exceptions, federal grants given for chimp-based research began to decline significantly. In 2005, the research had run its course.
Yes,
there was pressure from animal rights activists. So it's almost like you survived the war, but you couldn't survive the pressure from animal rights activists. Isn't there an irony there?
I think they were right. Chimpanzees really shouldn't be used in experiments. I really do feel this way. There are certain instances where it would be very difficult to do the research without chimpanzees unless you used humans. If you're going to do work in chimpanzees, you should set up a system so that at the end of the research, they have a place where they can be retired to and that they can live a nice chimp life to the best of whatever is available.
And that is exactly what Monkey Island is. It's not just the island security guard throwing lollipops at the